know. I know that some of you are questioning, why did she not go into mime? I appreciate that the skill that I just showed with my rope pulling and my window pressing was probably more than most of you could take. I agree. I myself am questioning why I did not do that. And I think that we can all agree, if my life continues to go on a downward trajectory career-wise, that there'll always be something, as long as I'm willing to wear tight black and white striped top, very tight trousers in black, and a beret, maybe some red lipstick and some white face like when I was a goth. Anyway, everybody, sorry about that. We're a few minutes late, but never mind. Apologies. People are saying that the sound's working, Pete, so you can stop freaking out. Pete's had a slight breakdown. He's probably going to need some kind of help shortly. Apologies, apologies, apologies. Lovely seeing you all. I did start talking about like really important stuff that obviously you've all missed, but never mind. I just can't go through it again. It was just probably life-breaking, changing, you know, that's how good it was. But moments passed, so sorry. Thanks for the lip readers, by the way. Worries me slightly that some of you were so on point with my lip reading. It's like, if I ever get caught unawares saying things that I shouldn't, you'll be able to call me out on it. Just noticing that today is the first day of whatever the first day is, that means that we can get back to normal apparently. I haven't been anywhere today, so I can't really compute that, but I do believe that it's happened. I saw pictures of people in pubs earlier on. I do love that about the UK. It's like, oh my God, how do we adapt to this new? We'll go to the pub. The pub is always the place for the answer. Lovely to see you all. I'll get on with the questions now just because we've missed some time. Lovely seeing all of you at the moment coming on. I'm 43 years of age, and over the years I've suffered on and off from depression and anxiety. 4 weeks ago I got I can't say that, and seem to have developed anxiety again. It's a different, I can't even pronounce that drug, which I'm finding it hard to deal with, and constantly feel sick with it and just want it to end. I'd rather be dead than continue to feel like this. So whenever you go through a change of medication, I don't know whether we talk about it enough really. Everybody's got a different viewpoint on medication. So some people are more meditate than medicate. They're more social prescribing than dealing with drugs in the way that we do within the psychological and psychiatric system. But really, it's whatever works for you, isn't it? So if you've been on a particular drug and then they have given you a particular type that you might not have been used to before, then often you can have some pretty challenging experiences, because you know, you're dealing with brain chemicals, and you're dealing with the changes in your body, and you're also dealing with the acceptance of the fact that you're going on some medication, and you're also dealing with things like hope that, you know, maybe this will work, maybe this will help. And then if you don't automatically get those kind of changes, it can be really disappointing. So even though you might be going on a journey to healing, there's a chance that those drugs that you've been given are going to work really well, but you're going to have to take some time. And when it doesn't happen, and we've felt so sad and so down and so anxious, and then we're given this ray of hope, whatever that thread is, if we don't really get results straight away, sometimes that can be really challenging. So there's a few things that I'd say. First of all, you definitely speak to the person who prescribed those to you. Speak to them, because they will be able to reassure you, or they'll be able to identify that there are side effects they're not happy with. So either way, you're going to win. By speaking to them, they'll be able to let you know what they think is going on. But it could just be that you're taking time to adapt to it, and it's not expected to have any change for a good few weeks yet. And that is hard, but also it means that you're getting there. And the other side of it is, it means that that little bit of hope that you've got can stay ignited. Now, if they do say to you, well, actually, this shouldn't be happening, well, that's good, because that means they can then get you on something that they think is going to work better for you. It's like anything, isn't it? Like, antibiotics are amazing, right? But some people have really bad reactions to specific types. Or loads of people love cheeses, but there'll be one cheese that actually causes a reaction because of the live bacteria in it, for example. It's one of those things in any kind of thing that you take. You could have a reaction, and some people do and some people don't. Most people don't, but we all get unlucky at times. So don't look at this as if it's not working, that's the end of it. And again, this is a good time to start saying my old adage that I come out with, which is, when it comes down to feeling suicidal, they are very real feelings. They are very, very challenging. They are very painful. It's very agonizing. But also you have to remember that instead of killing the self, it's about killing the life sometimes that we're living. And somebody put a quote up on my Twitter feed before all about that. And it's something I really stand by. And I think in the past year, it's been really difficult to help people feel that there has been other alternatives to the feelings that they're sitting with. So usually I'd be saying, right, go and try a completely new career, go and try a completely new interest, go and think about vision boards of what you really want to achieve, think about activating the passions that you haven't been able to go and fulfill, and really work on that, along with things like meditation, exercise, eating more healthily, reaching out and asking for help. Those things have been really difficult in the past 12 months because we haven't had access to a lot of them. But now we're starting to move forward a little bit, and hopefully that will sustain itself, meaning that those things that you can change and challenge in your life that may have a counter effect on the anxiety and make you feel better and easier, they're more available now. So really think about that. And sometimes it can come down to being a bit like a strategist. Even though emotions don't feel strategic, a lot of the time they feel quite reactive, we can still be really strategic with the way that we work with our emotions. So I've really noticed more anxiety within myself recently, and that's meant that as opposed to allowing myself to just sit there and feel helpless, it's meant that I've had to get more organized. And organization might seem so different to an emotional response, but actually what it does is it means that I feel that I've got order in my life and I know what I'm doing and working towards. So when people talk about SMART targets, which are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and usually time-bound orientated, we do that because it's actually really helpful. You don't want to overwhelm yourself with massive goals such as, I have to end my anxiety now. And a lot of us do that. I've got to stop feeling anxious now. Actually, it's going to take time. So it's more about, what are my achievable milestones? Okay, I'm going to do 2 things this week that are going to change my state a little bit. I'm going to do a meditation stream every night. And then just before I go to bed, every single evening, I'm going to write 3 things that I'm really grateful for. And I'm going to write 1 thing that I struggled with, but that I'm really glad that I got through it because it helps me deal with my resilience. And when you're talking about being grateful, you don't need to go for the big stuff. You can be like, I really enjoyed my cheese sandwich for dinner. Gratitude doesn't need big wins. Or it could be, I really appreciated the way that that person smiled at me when I walked past them today. Those tiny small wins help neural pathways form more positively. So think about a couple of things in the next few weeks, each week, that you can change your state with. Again, the next week it might be, I'm going to go out for 20 minutes without my phone, and I'm just going to walk and I'm going to look up at the trees. I'm going to see as much nature as I can. It's about allowing yourself to notice, as people know who come here often, the collateral beauty that's around you. And I know how hard that is as well. I really do. But I understand that things like organisation, strategy and gratitude can really help, not to eliminate anxiety, because anxiety is there for a reason. It's trying to educate you on something, even if that's about finding calm or recognising that some things aren't working for you in your life. But once you do that, you can help yourself adapt to that new situation by creating these kind of plans, okay? So they're things that I'd look at, but don't give up, and certainly go back to your general practitioner and say, I need to have a conversation about this because this is how it's making me feel. And they'll probably reassure you that it's all right. And if not, they'll reassure you there's another option. Hi, I've suffered with bulimia now for 15 years. I'm 55. I know I need to break the cycle. It's every night and it's become part of my routine. My husband knows it's something and I have and knows it's still happening, but he never mentions it and doesn't challenge me, which I find strange, as there's so much about my life I need to change. Not sure where to start. So first of all, I think it's really important to acknowledge that a lot of people don't understand that bulimia, anorexia, bulimia, where they're combined, and other eating disorders can happen at any point in somebody's life. I think that there is this misconception that just young people are afflicted by these kind of issues, and of course it simply isn't true. So you were 40 when you started with your bulimia, and arguably I'd ask you to look back at what was going on in your world at that point. It's not because we're looking for an absolute trigger. It's not like this was the reason. I think we do that too much, you know? I think that's one of the reasons why people with post-trauma struggle quite a lot, because often there can be a series of events that can lead to a certain situation. Often it's more about, okay, what was going on in my world? Was there a lot of chaos? Was there trauma? Was I struggling in a relationship? Was I trying to lose weight and then suddenly found myself getting into this cycle where I wanted to overeat but not take the consequences as far as my physical appearance looked? You know, it's like explore what was kind of going on in those dynamics. You've got 15 years now of entrenched and ingrained habits, and that's going to take a lot of time to break, right? But it begins with a choice. It really does. Bulimia is something I know very well, and it begins with an acknowledgement that firstly, it's not a way to get the most from your life. Apart from it being dangerous, you know that. You don't need me to tell you that. Apart from bulimia obviously rising the potential of death, we know that, and the obvious problems it can cause with your internal organs, and also just the shitty way it makes you feel, you know, because it's exhausting, isn't it, right? Every single night being sick, it's exhausting. And also it's like set that situation where you've got that habit, so it's almost like it's become ingrained within your everyday behaviour. The fact that your husband isn't saying anything, now that's a challenge for you, because on one level, you want him to interrupt your pattern. You want him to say, I know that you're being sick, and I know that we need to work on this so that you feel supported. But I'd also ask you to think about some of your behaviours before it got to this stage. There's a lot of secrecy, there's a lot of avoidance. There's probably been times in your life where, you know, you didn't want him to notice, and where he got too close to noticing, and probably your behaviours around that would have been a bit shifty and a bit rejective, and a way of almost coordinating him to learn a behaviour averse to challenging you, because that would have worked for you when you needed bulimia in your head, in your life, right? We've got to a point now where you're like, I want this to stop, and why is my husband colluding with my behaviour? But we can't expect him to be the one who goes, you need to stop. Because firstly, you'll always find somebody else who can tell you to do something differently. And if you're going to blame him for not giving you the interruption, then you'll always find somebody else to blame. So we always want to own our behaviour, we want to be accountable for that behaviour. But what you could really do with, and it's scary, really is scary, is to just sit down with him and say, you know I'm bulimic. I've been bulimic for 15 years. I want to change this pattern, but I'm going to need some really big help with that. Now, at that point, if he doesn't give you the help, you've got every right to have him as far as being an unsupportive partner. But it's probably very scary for him to know how to engage in that conversation unless you bring it up, because he's allowed it to go on for so long with you. You've kind of both become part of that lie that everything's okay. It always takes two people to lie, yeah? If one person won't agree with that situation, then a truth is told. But you're going to have to find that strength, and you're 55, you can do this. You've been through a lot in your life. It's hard, but sit with him and just say, you know I've got bulimia. I have bulimia. I want to change my bulimia. And that one action transitions, because immediately you're not in the same state of behaviour that you were, and it'll be scary, and you'll want to regret saying it for a bit, because you'll be like, oh my God, that's what I do every night. Now he's going to know. But this isn't about him then forcing you to do anything. It's about you being able to then say, look, how do we interrupt my pattern when it comes down to eating in a way that's going to be good for regulation? I definitely think after 15 years you could do with some therapy, if only to kind of explore what you've been using bulimia for. What is it serving a purpose in your life for? What are your feelings of unworthiness about your body potentially? What is it that you feel that you're lacking, that you fill with food but then reject? Because bulimia is very much like that. There's a void, so we fill it with food, but actually the void is usually from a sense of loneliness, or maybe a fear of purpose, sometimes of grief. So we fill it, and it works just for those moments, you know, where it's all for you, where you get to have everything and no one gets to take anything away from you, and you can have as much as you want with no consequences, right? And that's where the purging comes in. So it's like then, but no, we're not allowed anything, and no, I can't have that, and I'm a terrible person for all those feelings. And that's how the cycle is. But if you stop at the point where you go, what is that feeling I'm trying to fill? What is it that I'm lacking? What is it? That's where the beginning of that work really begins. You're not a bad person for having bulimia. You're not a failure for having bulimia. You're just an individual who created a strategy to deal with something challenging or unmanageable, and it's one that's outlived its purpose, it's not good for you. And of course, that means you've got to find a new purpose, you've got to find a new reason, you've got to find a new strategy, which is why being honest with the people around you who you love is really important. It's key. And then how can you break that habit? You know, we get the way that habits work. There's a cue. For example, it's 10:30 at night. My cue is, this is the point where I go and allow myself to binge. Then there is the behavior, and that is the eating. And then there is the throwing up, which is the reward to some degree, which means that I've had all of this and I've got rid of it all, and there's no kind of consequences apart from to myself. I don't have to wear it on my body, for example. So these are how habits become entrenched and ingrained. And breaking that needs help, support, and also that exploration. You can absolutely leave bulimia behind. I do not believe it when people say you have to live with an eating disorder your entire life. That is not true. It's something that I personally lived, and it's not true. You can be healthy and happy with your body as it is right now. But you have to accept that you deserve food, that food is merely fuel. It gets you from A to B, that you don't ever need to overfill yourself. You can just be content with what you eat. And also that if you put the dedicated behaviors that bulimia have taught you about wanting to have everything, but not necessarily have the consequences, you can actually arguably think about, well, actually, what if I just allowed myself to have everything, but good consequences? What if I really dedicated myself to health? If I really concentrated on well-being? What if I allowed all of that focus that I used for self-disgust and loathing to harm myself? What if I put that all into good purpose and use? And it can do amazing things. But very few people can just do it by themselves. They need a buddy in that. And your husband could really serve. And that's really hard. I'd really like you to get back in touch to tell me if you've had that ability to just sit down and say, look, we both know we live in this charade where my eating is concerned. Because you can have the rest of your life without this eating disorder, and you deserve the rest of your life without it. You are enough as you are without needing to fill this void. The void needs to be filled in a different way. You need to find it. What is it that's missing? And you can always find it. But therapy can really help as well. Hi Emma, what is the way to find the best therapist? Actually, I read that wrong. I'm so dyslexic. It says, hi Emma, what is the best way to find a good therapist? But I just decided to change that sentence around a little bit. It depends. If you can't afford a therapist yourself, you're going to have to be reliant on the NHS. Obviously, loads of really qualified people. But what I'm saying there is you might not get a referral to a person that you connect with, but hopefully you will. Most people do. So you're going to kind of have to have a look at the drawer when it comes down to ones on the NHS, because obviously there's a waiting list and whoever takes you will take you because your turn has come up. Hopefully it'll be brilliant. If you're paying for a therapist, then there are different things I'd look at. So first of all, I'd read about the different paradigms. So you might want CBT, you might want DBT, you might want EMDR, you might want schema therapist, you want an integrative therapist like me, you might want somebody who also has a specialism in clinical hypnosis. There are all these different areas. You might want something transcendental and spiritual. It's about thinking, okay, who am I as a human being? And what do I really want from therapy? Do I want to tell my story? Because if you want to tell your story, CBT might not be the best place for you. If you want to deal with trauma, but you don't necessarily want to go through reliving some of it in a very feelings way, you could go for EMDR, which is amazing. If you want to work on attachment issues and abandonment issues and trauma, you might want to look at schema therapy. There are all these different types. So the first thing I'd do before you go, right, this is what I'm going to go for, I'd look at the kind of practices that are out there and I'd explore which one feels like it's a good fit for you. It might be like I do, like I'm integrative, so I'm just like a pick a mix of lots of different things depending on how my client is. That's stage one. Stage two, if you're paying, I think you should be able to email them or send a message to them and just say to them, can you have a 10-minute chat to kind of feel that out? And that is very normal because you shouldn't have to pay for that initial 10-15 minutes. But what you do want to get is you want to get a feeling for that person. You want to think to yourself, whilst I was having that conversation with that individual, could I imagine just being totally honest with them and not feeling like I've got to please them or I've got to share with things in a way that I'd feel like I had to because they demanded it. Did I feel comfortable with this person? Did they make me feel that we had rapport? Those are the things that I think make such a difference. Now, as far as it goes, there are lots of different awarding bodies. BPS, obviously, is one. British Psychological Society is a membership, so you've got membership search there. You've got my association, which is the BACP. You've got HCPC if you want a psychologist that's clinical, or you've obviously got a psychiatrist as well if you want to go for something that's a bit more assessment based and then critical to kind of medication. But when it comes down to therapy, like BACP is where you can go to have a look at the register. And you can go online and there is a register where you can pop in your area that you live and it will have a list of therapists. But again, before you even get to that, I just look at the types of therapy because not everyone is affiliated to those kind of boards. You know, there are different organisations and it's find your fit with the person. I think if you find your fit with the relationship and the therapist, then what needs to happen, needs to change, needs to grow, it will happen, it will change, it will grow. I really believe that. And also know that if you've gone to one before and it wasn't good, it's not that therapy is bad. It's just that there are some really average people in every job, right? And there are some really brilliant people in every job, and there are even some bad people in jobs. So you've got to apply the same rule and route with therapy. And often it's not even that the practitioner isn't good, it's that they're not your good. Everybody's different, right? So explore it that way as well. Hi Emma, how can an autistic person improve their communication skills? I'm finding it difficult to say things or tell a story in a way that's not all over the place, if that makes sense. I don't yet have any support in place as I'm waiting for my assessment. I've only realised I have difficulty as I've been vlogging recently. Any tips or resources would be really appreciated. So obviously what you're talking about there sounds, of course, when you've got spectrum behaviour like that, anxiety can be a big part of it because the world is made for typical, isn't it? And I wouldn't class myself as typical, but that's the way that the world is to some degree. There's an expectation. It's what I always say to people when they're neurodiverse. You know, the world is made for right-handed people, isn't it? But there are loads of left-handed people. But if you're born as a left-handed person in a right-handed world, then everything's just that little bit more challenging for you. And it's just the way that we've got this stereotype for what a human is, and it's not right, but it's just the way it is. So arguably, I think you've got to acknowledge that part of this is the anxiety that you're feeling. And when you start owning the fact that you have autism, one of the most important things is to not mask. And I think if you're vlogging, this is what I'd really want to say to you, is you need to be you. I was talking to an amazing entrepreneur last week. I do a disability APG, which is basically looking at entrepreneurship and disabilities. And there's this incredible person on there. We were just talking about certain things and masking came up. And I think that I've talked to quite a lot of people in the past who've realised that it's exhausting to try to be anybody but the person that you are. So when you're vlogging, forget whether you're autistic or otherwise. If you feel anxiety, it's going to knock you off your game, right? If you're hyper aware of other people's opinions around you and you're really sensorily aware of how people can react, that's going to put you off your game. But if you take a step back and you're like, I'm going to vlog because I want to just be fully me. And being fully me means expressing myself honestly and openly and acknowledging when I struggle. It's one of the most liberating things. So take this evening when I started off and everything fell apart, and you know, at that point I can do one of two things. I can be like, oh my God, it hasn't worked out, my life's just gone horribly wrong. Or I can be like, okay, that's life, people are understanding, it'll be okay, we'll just come back. And it's almost like by just fully accepting your human, you know, mistakes, your human issues that will just occur because you are human, it relieves you of that tension. I think that's the same for everybody. For any of you who are worrying about who you are and how you come across, just stop. If you're vlogging and you're making mistakes, acknowledge it. If you're on the autistic spectrum and you're saying whilst you're vlogging that there is something that comes up for you, be like, you know, man, this is hard sometimes. I deal with autism, but I'm really pushing my boundaries and I'm actually willing to put myself out there in a way that shows others that they can do the same. That's a massive permission base. You know, you're offering people a gift. Don't fail to acknowledge that. Of course, there are things you can do, Rehearsing is something that you can do. With really socially phobic people, we teach them to rehearse certain things so that they feel that they can express themselves better. There are programs where you can get auto cues on your phone. So if you're vlogging, you can actually read what you need to say. So that if you just want some bullet points and that'll be helpful for you, you can use those. That will build your confidence as well. But I think the big one is just absolutely, without any fear, unapologetically, acknowledge that you're enough as you are, mistakes and all. I love the fact you're vlogging. The more you do it, the more you'll build your confidence, the more you'll grow into that person. And in the end, that anxiety that you felt, it will become just a normal part of your experience to absorb it and just manage it. And that's such a powerful lesson. And what's great about vlogging is that people go on a journey with you. So essentially, the people who start watching you at the very beginning, 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, they'll remember you as you go on that journey. And that's a really beautiful journey to share. It really is. So genuinely try to be as authentic as possible in that way. Any tips on controlling and managing feelings of self-consciousness and the anxiety around feeling self-conscious? I'm allowed to see my therapist now face to face, but I'm scared that if she sees me face to face, she'll not like me anymore because of my weight and how I look. I feel ashamed and embarrassed that I've let myself go a lot and don't look skinny anymore. I feel like I have to be skinny to be worthy of anything. Part of that reason is because there is a massive myth in our society about what is beautiful and what is not. And the reason it's a myth is because when you walk down the street, nobody, apart from people who often are prepubescent, work with a lot of models who are very, very skinny and prepubescent, who are very tall and therefore tiny, or very ill when they're older because they've got an eating disorder. By the way, I do accept before somebody comes on and says, it's really stereotypical of you to say that models are anorexic. I know, but on a percentage level, let me tell you, there is a far higher percentage of people with eating disorders from that particular activity because of the pressure that is placed upon them to remain a certain way, and that is factual and statistically correct. But for most of us mere humans, our bodies are what get us from A to B. They're our vehicle. We're not Victoria's Secret's models, and I've seen the diets that they eat for a few weeks before, and again, it's mythical. It's not really how they are. It's only how they are on that moment, on that stage, in that experience, and that's all the way around that works. So there's this myth in the modern world of what is meant to be acceptable, and these standards are bad for us. But also, if we're comparing ourselves to other people's bodies, we're not living and appreciating our own. Your body, your unique map. If you're like me, I've got stretch marks, I've got scars. I mean, I had quite a lot of accidents when I was a kid. I was just one of those really unlucky kids. I had a really bad car crash when I was 21. I've got scars all over my body in different places, and I've got stretch marks and saggy bits. And you know what? It's okay, because I didn't want to be a Victoria's Secret model, and neither do you. Even if you're in your head, you're thinking, oh yeah, well that'd be great. No, that's not what you want it to be. You'll have dreams and aspirations and hopes and desires, but most of them won't involve your body. All you need to think about is your vehicle. This is an amazing vehicle that lets you breathe and taste great food and smell amazing scents and sense when somebody's sad and wrap your arms around somebody when they're struggling. That's what you are. You're a human being, an empathic, beautiful, unique human being, and you're more than what you see in that mirror. And if you feel that the past year has led to you overeating, which is very common, even I have done things like I've looked at my alcohol consumption compared to a normal year, and I gave up alcohol for quite a while, but then it's crept back in here and there. I never would drink in a month, let alone a week. I just wouldn't. But you know what? When you've gone through these lockdown behaviours and you felt isolated, everybody has found ways. And some of us have got really lucky and found exercise, and they're bouncing out of it looking great. But for the most part, we've all found comfort in a little few things that ordinarily we wouldn't do that with. And I think eating is one of those. And you've done that. You've put weight on. But that can easily be dealt with. But you don't want to be thinking about losing weight as whether you're worthy or not. Okay, you might want to be fitter. You might want to be healthier. But your view of yourself is probably a far harsher judgment than anybody else would ever give you. In fact, it will be. Your practitioner doesn't care what you look like. They're not going to be sitting there thinking that you've put on a few pounds. That's not what a practitioner does. But they are the perfect place and space to have that conversation. I would welcome you in to be sitting there and to say, I'm really struggling with the fact that going back into society, feel like I've done things to my body that I'm not happy with. Because often that'll be perception based and not reality. It can be to do with a real phobia of going out again because you've kind of got used to the way things are. So you start building these ideas around what might be wrong with you. Or it might be literal. Maybe you have put on weight. Maybe you've put on a lot of weight. But you know what? That's okay. Because if you want to change that, you have the power to change that. There are so many things that you can do. But the one thing you have to do is go, I am good enough, larger, smaller. I am good enough. You, the personality, the unique individual, the person that people will fall in love with, it is not your shape, it is not your size, it's what is contained within it. And to me, you're doing yourself a real injustice, a real disservice by thinking that putting on weight makes you unworthy or being a certain size makes you worthy. You are worthy. And even though you've got all these extremes now where you'll see body positivity and you'll see lots of different models around all different shapes and sizes, it doesn't translate. I know it doesn't translate. Because what happens if you put on some weight and you're looking at a picture of like a woman who's, shall we say, a size 16 in a bikini and they've got her all lit up and she looks fabulous, you won't see her as that size. You'll be like, oh yeah, she's a plus size model, and it'll be, but she's happier, but she's more successful, but she's smiling more broadly than me. There's all these buts, yeah? But actually, when you bring it back down, it's like, yeah, actually, she's a model because she's beautiful, because bodies are beautiful. Our human experience is so unique and we're contained in these vehicles, but it's incredible when you think about what you can do. Take a step back from this idealized idea of what you're meant to be and step into who you are right now. And then if you want to make some shifts and changes, then you go and sit with your therapist and you have that conversation and they won't judge you for it. Look, the core conditions of therapy are unconditional positive regard, just having no judgments and really acknowledging that people are worthy in that moment and being congruent, being able to kind of acknowledge honestly what's going on in the room. So really remember those core conditions. All you will get from your practitioner is care and compassion and understanding, and it's a great place to go and feel safe. And from there you can start building that self-worth that you sorely need to build. Because like I said, if you asked people around you what they thought about you, the last thing they bring up would be your body, because there'll be a list of characteristics that they think of you that are far bigger than any shape can contain, okay? Really try to concentrate on that. Any tips for controlling and managing feeling self-conscious? Oh, you've already got that. I'm reading it again. Hi Emma, I hope you don't mind me messaging. My 4-year-old daughter is meeting with an educational psychologist today as she isn't making much progress in her class according to her teachers. As a parent, we don't have any concerns, neither does her grandma, a retired primary school teacher, but I realise I'm not an expert and I'm keen to know their insight. The teachers have been quite vague on what they're looking to diagnose. I also don't know how they'll assess her. Please, if you have the time, could you advise on how they might do this? Well, I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't know whether your child goes to a private school or a private nursery, because it's pretty amazing that there are teachers that are at this stage looking at her and referring her to an educational psychologist, because actually it's really expensive to do that. And most schools don't necessarily have the resources or do it. So it might feel really scary that your child's been selected in that way. And you're like, oh my God, what could be going on with my child? But I'd see this as like a really positive thing. I know that the education system is not geared up for every child. Simple as that. Certainly wasn't geared up for me when I was a secondary school pupil, not at all. And I think that a lot of us can relate to that. What really strikes me is you have a daughter that you're not worried about, and you have a mother who's a grandmother of that daughter, who absolutely feels that she's perfectly developmentally okay. So I think there are some real positives to take from it, which is that on a developmental level, as far as you're concerned, she's reached a milestone, she's having fun, she's happy. Remember, she's just had a really weird year. I think lots of kids are going to have some developmental issues around that. But it could be that some of her behaviours when they're looking at her, when she's doing her work, are just making them think that there is a potential, that there is something learning-wise that they might need to figure out. And an educational psychologist is so qualified in this way. It will be a range of different tests. It will be a global range of tests to see and identify whether there is anything that means that your daughter could require some extra help with. And that's what it's about. It's not about what is wrong with this child at all. It just might be that the teachers, in their experience, feel that there are some things that they notably see as a little bit different between her and some of her peers, or children that she's been around and that they feel are gravitating in a different way to certain developmental keys. Also, she's 4. And like, not being funny, 4 is really young. And of course, sometimes we can see those kind of issues. I'm hideously dyslexic, statemented. So nobody realised that till I was nearly 15. The truth is that if you have a child who is displaying certain behaviours educationally and you get in there right at the beginning, it's fabulous. So I wouldn't necessarily believe that they're going to find anything that they think assessment-wise requires that she's got some more help that's needed. I would stick with your gut instinct at this moment in time because you know her better than anybody else. So I wouldn't worry, but I would really be happy about a school that was doing that, because just having somebody have that pair of eyes, and educational psychologists are so qualified and they've got this whole range and battery of tests that they can do. And if you just at the end of that find out that you've just got this gorgeous, unique little individual who doesn't fit the normal paradigm but is fine, that's reassuring. But then if there are maybe some things regarding the way that she interacts with, you know, her learning and her development, then they're going to have the resources given to her. But parents tend to know, you tend to know what's going on with your kid, right? At the end of the day, I knew, with respect, I won't say it very loudly, but I knew at like 4 and 5 that my boys were just like the brightest, loveliest kids, but they were probably never going to be brain surgeons. And that's not because they're not incredibly bright, it's because academia doesn't really suit a lot of people. I kind of think, when are people going to start saying that, right? When are we going to be like, academia doesn't really suit quite a lot of people. Can't remember a lot of people in my class struggling. Maybe the system needs to change a little bit. But yeah, please don't worry. But keep in touch because I'd love to hear about that. But again, I'd just be like grabbing that assessment with both hands, because it's not that there's anything wrong with your child. It's just that if she needs to learn in a slightly different way, like a kinesthetic way, which is how we should teach everybody, they can look at objectives to help that happen. So kind of be aware of that. And I love the fact that your mum's a teacher, because she's old school. She's old school. She'll know. Hi Emma, since finishing my hypnotherapy, I've been doing loads better with the health anxiety I was struggling with. I'm now back in the office 3 days a week, which really helps, but I'm finding when going somewhere different and new, I get really anxious and worried leading up to the event. I'm constantly worried I'm going to go backwards into my recovery, and I'm scared to go back to that dark place. How can I manage the stage of recovery to keep myself calm and stop myself going backwards? The hardest part and the scariest part about healing is healing. It really is. Once healed, a few years down the line, we're like, nailed it. But the scariest bit about getting well is thinking that we'll ever go back to how we felt when we weren't. And there's a couple of reasons why it feels scary. One is obvious, that we've been in a place that was really challenging for us. So we know what it feels like and we don't want to return there. But the second is, hope is scary because you don't want it taken away from you and you want to stay in that place. And so to some degree, allowing ourselves to sink fully into that sense of peace and contentment with our healing is almost equally as scary as going back to that dark place, because you feel like, if I allow myself to taste this and to truly think you've done it, you've nailed it, what happens if it gets taken away? So to some degree, you've created these safe areas and spaces. And by the way, every practitioner will have a different take on this. This is just my take on it in this moment. So be aware that other people may advise you differently. But imagine thinking about it in this way, where you've been to these dark places, you've found this healing, and you've nailed these particular environments where you're like, yeah, I'm at peace here. I'm in the office. My health anxiety isn't bad at the moment. I've been doing really well in my hypnotherapy. But there's this little bit of you that's like, don't get too comfortable. If you get too comfortable, it might get taken away from you. So you have this kind of manifestation of, okay, well, let's worry about things that aren't constant but occur in my life so that I can allow myself to still maintain that bit of anxiety so I never get too comfortable. And we're going to get past that. But that's the healing process. So the most important thing to do is to realize that you've already achieved your goal. Your goal is to manage your health anxiety. You've managed it, right? You've got the toolkit. The hypnotherapist worked. You're effectively dealing with it. So you already have the strategies required. You can face something and confront something with anxiety head on and work around it and through it and with it. So you need to look at the strategies that have used and worked for you in that hypnotherapy. That's number one. Number two, you need to acknowledge that you're looking for a place to put your anxiety at the moment. And things like catastrophizing is a good place to put it, but it's not helpful for you. So you've got to bring it back. And it's a little bit like in hypnosis where you're kind of working with the unconscious. We want to teach it some new patterns. So the minute that you start allowing that cycle of thought to happen and you start obsessing about how you're going to go somewhere and what's going to happen and when you're going to get there and if it's going to be okay, I just want you to break that cycle. I often say this example because I'm sat here with a mug, but you're just going to do a thought stopping exercise. You're going to distract yourself and you're going to go, I'm having this loop in my head. I'm not going to let myself carry on. Okay, what is this? It's a mug, it's green, it's got a rabbit on the front. Apparently it's reading Watership Down and saying, fucking hell, because I think it's a very bad story for a rabbit to read. And we're gonna just have that conversation now. Whilst on one level that feels very simplistic, it's really powerful. It's called a cognition break. It's a thought stopping process. We are distracting ourselves from the cycle. We are bringing ourselves to the present. We are focusing our attention on something that we can concentrate on and that we can create thought processes for that deflect from that original thought. So something as simple as that is really important. You can also create a grounding exercise. A lot of clients will often go out and spend quite a long time finding a pebble or a stone that they feel is nice to hold. And it has to be nice to hold because what I want you to do is to carry it with yourself all the time. And the minute that you start having that anxiety, you grab hold of that stone, you rub it, and you create a grounding exercise. You can also do what I talk about often, which is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, where you're having that cycle of thought and fear, and you just go, bring myself back to the present. 5 things I can see, 4 things I can hear, 3 things I can touch, 2 things I can taste, 1 thing I can do. All those kind of things are really, really helpful to just bring you back to the present. Practice some meditation, brilliant stuff. It just helps to really relax you on a daily basis. And what we want to do is when we've got anxiety, you're over-creating cortisol and adrenaline. We want to balance that out. So even though you don't feel anxious, when you're having a good day, do the meditation. We're going to reduce that cortisol and adrenaline. We're going to increase that oxytocin, that dopamine, that serotonin. We're going to get our brain chemicals leveled out. Same with exercise, same with mindful practice, anything that can bring you into that, okay? And the other thing that I do is like know your safe places and spaces at work. Who can you say it to? What's your colleague that when you're getting told you've got to go to a different place, who can you go, oh, I don't want to do this, I'm feeling a little bit anxious. Have that moment where you can just express yourself. But out of all of that, just know that it's so common. When you are healing, it is so common to be afraid that it's going to get taken away, but it's not because you've done the work. And remember, even if you have a really bad day one day, that is not the end of your journey. That's just one bad day. What we do often with situations like this is we decide to make it a black and white experience, an all or nothing experience. Like, oh my God, I've had a bad day today, that's it. That's just the fear. That's what's actually reminding you don't want to go back there. So keeping you aware of that and making you aware that you don't want to go back there, that's your motivation for not. It's reminding you this is better, this is a better place, this is a better space, I like it here. And then at one point, you're just going to unconsciously, but aware-wise, in the end, become so content in that space. I think you'll be able to be like, I've done it. I had a really great conversation with somebody who'd seriously suffered with OCD during lockdown and terrible, terrible intrusive thoughts. And I remember keeping saying, I promise you, if you do the work, one day, all of those thoughts, they'll have gone away. And they have. But you know what? The fear, first of all, when they've gone, that they might come back. But it's just, no, keep working the plan. Keep working the plan. They'll stay away. And that's what you're going to do. Keep working the plan. You've created the strategies. You've got the toolkit. Doesn't mean life's going to be simple. Doesn't mean that there isn't going to be anxiety. It doesn't mean that things won't go wrong. It doesn't mean that life won't hurt and you won't feel pain. All that's going to happen. That's life. But it means that you've got the strategies, which means that as you fall at times, like we all do, you will not hit the ground as hard and you will most likely have a safety net on the way down. So be aware of that, and then you'll definitely have a ladder that you know you can climb up, because that's what strategies do. I've been overeating throughout the past year and gained so much weight. Any ideas on breaking that cycle of reaching for food all the time? So everybody knows I've got my app. There are loads of free plans on there. If you go on Appy, there's the Shape plan. If you choose Shape and you look on there, there'll be loads of things that can help you to kind of get back on track, and you can plan it in the planner section so you can kind of see what you're doing all week. That's one thing I'd say. Also WW, if you want to sign up to something, they've got like an app that's 360 and again, really effective in lots of different ways, and you can get like a coach and a buddy and stuff like that. So sometimes that can help. But where overeating is concerned, again, everybody has different opinions. Please acknowledge this is just mine. But essentially, I always think about the old brain and new brain. So I think about the primordial animal brain, the one that existed when we were instinctual, before, let's say, between 40 to 100,000 years ago, when we became what we would know as consciousness beings. I think that's really important to be aware of, because we can see that around 100,000 years ago, we started to do things like painting on caves, probably aided and abetted by lots of psychedelic drugs, because people started realizing that they could eat things like magic mushrooms. But certainly there seems to be an awakening of consciousness. But if you imagine the old brain being instinct, and that's the one that says run, hide, fight, have sex, eat, drink. It's just a very rudimentary, it's something that tells us to react in a certain way. It's essential for survival, but essentially it's not really sophisticated. But then this amazing area of the prefrontal cortex really started to become very conscious. So the amygdala is what I was just talking about, that area of the brain that's much more instinct-based. But this prefrontal cortex in particular, it's an area of higher functioning. It's hopefully what I'm using now, although some of the trolls would disagree. Essentially, it's what helps me communicate and think about things relatively quickly. Now, when you are feeling sad or lonely or bored or frustrated, it often comes with a feeling of emptiness. I think a lot of you can relate to that, right? Just that feeling of hollowness, like sadness. But my higher conscious brain, my prefrontal cortex area, if I'm willing to deal with it on that level, then I can go, oh, I'm really sad. I need to do something with that feeling. I need to move through that feeling. But if my amygdala takes over, because I don't want to confront the difficult emotion, I don't want to worry about the reality of the fact that I hate my job or I'm not happy in my relationship, maybe I'll just experience it as emptiness. And if I allow that to happen, my amygdala will be like, I have a solution for emptiness. Off you go to the fridge, you eat loads of food, and actually it fills it temporarily, right? So the emptiness of the amygdala senses emptiness, not loneliness, fills it with food, then you feel terrible, but actually for a short amount of time whilst you're eating that food, it actually makes you feel like you're not quite as lonely or empty, right? You're not quite as sad. So even though it's a very poor strategy in the long term, because obviously you end up wearing the way that you feel, you can see how that part of your brain isn't trying to destroy you, it's just trying to create a strategy. It's just not the best one. So how do you work through it? Well, first of all, you stop eating the experience, you stop eating the feelings, because boredom, frustration, sadness, loneliness, you can't resolve them through food. You just can't do it, you know that. And also, no matter how much you eat, it'll only ever taste the same. So it's almost like it's a fundamentally inappropriate way of meeting that need, because it won't solve anything, and it's actually not the healthiest way to get through a feeling, because everything tastes the same in the end and you don't really enjoy the food you're eating anyway. So bring it back to what is it that I'm feeling, and then work with that emotion. So ask yourself, When you get that kind of feeling, that's the cue. Oh, I feel sad. And then it's, I don't like feeling sad. I know, I'll have a couple of glasses of wine. So there's your behaviour, and the action is the drinking of the wine. And then the reward is, oh, I feel a bit less sad now. I feel a bit pissed. And it's okay. And now I can go and eat some food as well because, you know, it's okay. Do you see how that works with that behaviour model and that habits experience? Whereas if instead you go, I feel really sad. And that's really hard. And you just sit with it and you let it be. And you think to yourself, let's explore that. Let's journal. Let's go on an app designed for talking to other people who are in that situation. Let's sit with the feeling and figure out what it's here to teach me. So I know that when I want to go and have a brandy, you know, on a Friday night or whatever, obviously a very good quality brandy. It's not a good quality, it's whatever's on Tesco's, you know, whatever the reduced price one is, or they give it a fancy bottle, don't they? And they say it's 15 quid left and you're like, I'm buying into it. It's still 6 quid more than the other one. I'm buying into it though, it's got a nice box. I'm not saying I do that, but I do that. But the point is, like, you know, if I'm like struggling with something to do with grief, you know, it can be very, very normal to want to change that state. I'll have a brandy, but it's not good. It doesn't change my state. It temporarily avoids it. And how often can we do that? How often we can temporarily avoid dealing with the unavoidable? Just making ourselves more and more unhappy with the confrontation of the reality of what we've got to face. When it comes down to overeating, it tends to be that there is an avoidance of something that you need to confront. But it's scary. And sometimes you don't feel that you've got people on your side or the resources. So it's about creating those around you. And it's also about kind of saying to your brain, okay, amygdala, trying to solve this. I get it. You want to fill this feeling. You want to fill this void. I get it. But I'm going to take over from here. Prefrontal cortex, let's get in the driving seat. We're going to work this through. And that's really, I think, how you manage eating. Certainly, in my experience of working with clients, in my experience personally, I always explore my prefrontal cortex that way. I'm always like, you need to be in the driving seat now, because if I don't let that happen, instinctually, I'll do things that aren't necessarily good for me, because the old amygdala likes a bit of hedonism, likes a bit of mentalness as far as like action wise. So going out and punching walls, for example, you know, these are things the amygdala does to survive, right? And it's not good for us. So it's really important to kind of listen to that feeling and emotion. And that's the same for all of us. At the moment, the last 12 months has been very reactionary for a lot of us because we haven't had a lot of control over our world. So the most experience I've ever had of people talking about over drinking, overeating, you know, over everything, recreational drugs, becoming bad habits, this has never been as prevalent for me as in the last 12 months. You know, I'm hearing about it constantly. I'm talking to people constantly about it. And that's because when our mental health starts to decline, we're looking for solutions. And, you know, we can have a go at ourselves and be angry with ourselves because we chose gambling or drinking or overeating. You know, we can really be nasty to ourselves, but it's not because you're bad. It's because you're trying your best. You just haven't got the best solution. But you can only make that change when you start acknowledging it and just going, this feels a mess. And that can be really hard to acknowledge, to just sit in your human mess of what's happening, to look with absolute vision and clarity at what's gone wrong, and to know that that doesn't mean you're a failure. You know, you just took a wrong turn, and there are so many other turns that you can take, and there are so many straight roads, and there are so many beautiful scenes, and there are so many car crashes, and that's what makes life life. But it's all about just like sitting honestly and openly and completely accepting the mess that sometimes we end up in, and just knowing that, like any mess, we can get organized, we can clean it up, and we can make something beautiful from it. And that's really the key, I think. I'm not sure where we are on the roadmap to getting back to normal. I just hope that we all feel that we are at some point getting back to normal. And another word that I'd say before I finish this session, because this is about mental health and everybody being welcome, I just hope that we all have some compassion for differing views. I think it's really hard at the moment to have certain views in the public domain and not get attacked. I don't think we want to belong to a world like that. I really don't. I think that it's so essential right now that we are accepting of everybody's individual choices. That's it. Your job is to worry about you and your choice, and to allow others to worry about them and their choice. Because a society who just believes that they have a right to control other people's choices is a society that also overreaches its boundaries. And we have to have respect for each other. You don't need a lecture off me, obviously, but the point is, just think it's really important to be compassionate and kind. I do wave my hands around a lot before people get in touch and tell me that. I always find it interesting that people private message me and are like, your hands are distracting. And I'm like, I know, but they're my hands. And they have this life of their own. And without them, well, I wouldn't be able to do a lot for a start. But the point is, genuinely, I can't help it. It's just my neurotics. I have tics and my hands make a distraction to my tics. See you on Wednesday.